Hello, Comics Alternative fans. Before we start with the episode, we want to invite all of you to check out our Patreon campaign.
That's right. Go to www.patreon.com/comicsalternative for more details. There you'll find more information about the campaign and the cool rewards levels we have.
For as little as $1 a month, you can help us maintain good quality comics talk, and the more you contribute, the more perks you get.
These include monthly podcast episodes exclusive to Patreon supporters, as well as the chance to help us choose which books we review on the show. So be sure to visit www.patreon.com/comicsalternative and become one of our proud podcast patrons.
Yeah, and now on with the show.
This is the Comics Alternative, episode 133, a publisher spotlight on Koyama Press.
Countdown for blast off. X-5, 4, 3, 2, X-1, fire.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the spring releases from Koyama Press. These are publisher spotlights that we do occasionally. They're always fun to do. And this time around, we're going to be looking at Koyama. We'll start off by discussing Alex Schubert's Blobby Boys 2. Then we're going to be looking at Alex Degen's Mighty Star and the Castle of the Cancatervater. Following that, Ginette Lapalme's Confetti. And then finally, we're going to be looking at Dustin Harbin's Diary Comics. But before we get to those, we want to let all of our listeners know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. That's right. You can go to their website, dcbservice.com, and you'll find out that they're there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you will find every month all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that the discounts are 20 to 35% off cover price. And every single month they have incredible specials, and April is no exception. Sometimes those specials are at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off. But many times those discounts are more impressive than that.
That's right, and this month they have bundles from many different publishers where you can get a deeper discount on multiple comics from the same publisher than you would get if you ordered those issues individually. This month there are bundles from Archie, DC, Marvel, Dynamite, Valiant, and Vertigo. So you can get a load of bundles where you get some nice discounts on lots of books.
That's right, and we're at the tail end of April, but the thing about DCB Service, they don't mind late orders. So if you're like me and you wait to the last minute, that's okay. Go ahead and place your April order in the first days of May. They don't mind. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do pre-order there, be sure to send them an email and let them know that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Andy, we got a lot to discuss today.
That's true.
Yeah, but there are a couple things I want us to highlight before we get into our publisher spotlight on Koyama. First, we got a bit of listener mail.
Okay.
Mail time. Mail time.
Ooh, the mail's here. That means we get to see our old friend, Mailbox.
This actually came to us on our Facebook page. This is from Rob Banner, and he writes, "Nice review of Supreme Blue Rose. Thanks for that. Being a full-blown uber nerd for Supreme, I've been holding off on this new series, waiting to see if it addresses or even acknowledges the screw-up made during the Larson run. Having the Liefeld version chained up in the supremacy behind the scenes, the whole time he's actually never out of sight. So, actually, Rob is referencing a review show of ours from last year, back in July. So it's actually a little surprising that so much time has passed since Supreme Blue Rose issue number 1 came out. So, Rob, thanks for the comment, and also thanks for letting us know that our older issues have some staying power.
Yeah. Did you finish reading Supreme Blue Rose?
No, what happened there is what happens many times, especially with Image, is I'll read the first 1 or 2 issues and then trail off for no other reason because there are other things I need to read or I want to read. And I read the first 2 issues of Supreme Blue Rose, but not the entire run. How about you?
Yeah, I just finished it, and I do think it's probably a book that's best read all at once. I mean, I probably each time a new issue came out had to reread the previous issues because Warren Ellis is doing some kind of Grant Morrison-y stuff with the kind of commentary on the constant revision and reboots of superhero characters. So I'm wondering if our listener there was happy or sorely disappointed in that series, because I don't know if it addressed really any lingering continuity issues from previous Supreme series at all.
Okay. I know that that's one of the things I took away from the first 1 or 2 issues, and that is what he was playing around with in terms of the previous runs. And I really like that kind of metafictional self-awareness, putting all that into context. I know that I was listening to some other reviews on other podcasts at the time, and that kind of put some readers off, but I don't know. I really like that.
Yeah, I think as someone who's not a hardcore Supreme fan or even much, I haven't read much of Supreme. It's one of my gaps in my Alan Moore reading, but I really can't imagine somebody a Supreme fan looking for some closure or continuation even of the previous Supreme series would have found that the thing they were looking for. But I thought it was a good series nonetheless.
Okay. Well, apparently Rob thought so too. So again, thank you, Rob, for your messages, and we do appreciate all correspondence, whether it's via email, Facebook, Twitter, or on the forum. So keep it up, guys. Thanks for listening.
Yep.
And I think another thing we want to briefly mention is the Eisner nominations came out last week.
Yeah, and normally we would do a longer show on the Eisner Awards, and that may be something that you have planned for later on. But the one comment I wanted to make about the Eisner nominations is, very often we end up focusing or I do anyway, on the best comics-related book and best scholarly academic work, because those are kind of in our wheelhouses. And this year I'm really happy that under best comics-related work, the Comics Through Time, History of Icons, Idols, and Ideas encyclopedia set that Keith Booker edited for ABC Clio is nominated in that category. That is a massive project that Keith did, and I'm glad and proud to have been able to participate in it. I have a bunch of entries in those encyclopedias, and it's an interesting set. I don't know if you've seen this set at all. It's about $500 if you want to buy it, but what Keith did was organize each volume by basically time period.
Okay.
So, for example,
that's the title.
So I wrote, for example, rather than writing one entry on Roy Thomas, for example, I wrote multiple entries on Roy Thomas in multiple volumes. So, one on, Roy Thomas's Silver Age work, one on his Bronze Age work, and so on.
Now, how many volumes did that turn out to be?
It's 4 total.
Total, okay.
And so I can't remember how many entries I wrote. I wrote a lot, though.
Now, you also contributed to his earlier 2-volume Encyclopedia of Comic Books and Graphic Novels from a few years ago, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, I was on the editorial board for that, as well as a contributor. And so, anyway, this is a nice set, and it's probably out of the price range of most comic fans, but it's meant for libraries. So if you go to your library and check it out, you can see what I wrote about. I don't know, Hellblazer, or Gil Kane, or Roy Thomas, or Blackhawk.
So even
Lufine, maybe Lufine. Did I do Lufine? Reed Crandall. I think I did some Golden Age artists too. Anyway, Blackhawk.
So even though the Comics Alternative was not nominated for Best Comics Journalism or Website, as it well should have, but I'm a little biased there, we nonetheless have some kind of presence through your entries.
Yeah. So I am gonna just go ahead and call myself an Eisner nominated author.
Congratulations, my friend.
No, Keith deserves a lot of credit and praise for taking on such a massive project and getting it out there. So, but it's in some tough competition. Greg Sadowski's Basil Wolverton book, the 3rd volume of the Alex Toth biography set that Dean Mulaney and Bruce Canwell did. What Fools These Mortals Be, the story of Puck that IDW put out, which is a really nice book. Mm-hmm. And then 75 Years of Marvel Comics, that massive book that Roy Thomas wrote. So there's a lot of good stuff in that category, and good stuff in the other categories too, but that's for another conversation. Yeah,
you're right. And we may do a special episode later on the Eisner nominees. But it is worth mentioning that, now I didn't go through and count, but I think a vast majority of those books, or the categories, creators, titles that are nominated for this year, are ones that we discussed on the podcast or wrote about on the blog.
Possibly.
And if not the vast majority, then probably the majority.
I don't know. This can steer us into another conversation, but I think there's some categories in which we definitely hit on almost everything in them, and there's other categories where we didn't touch a single thing. So, and there seems to be a lot more mainstream superhero stuff in these categories than in more recent years. So
yeah, and I think part of that is due to the contributions of Grant Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's true.
Yeah. Well, interesting stuff to discuss, and maybe on a later show we'll go into more detail there. But we have a lot for today's show on Koyama, so let's get to that.
Yep, let's do that.
Now, the first book we're going to be discussing of the 4 spring releases from Koyama Press is Blobby Boys 2, and this is by Alex Schubert. And by the way, it's worth mentioning that of the 4 that we're discussing today, only Mighty Star and the Castle of Cancatervater, and that's a mouthful, came out this month in April. That one came out this month. But the rest of them are not due for release, at least according to Amazon, until that second week of May. So if you're excited by some of these reviews that you hear on this episode and you can't get the books yet, well, just sit tight. You will be able to soon. But anyway, the first one we want to discuss is Blobby Boys 2. And Andy, had you read Blobby Boys 1?
No, I haven't, but you have, right?
Yeah, I did. I remember when this came out, and Shay Henham, who has done quite a number of reviews for our blog and who's going to be doing the upcoming manga show with me, did a review of Blobby Boys, but I didn't read it at the time. So in preparation for today's episode, I went through to read Blobby Boys 1 so that I would feel a little more informed in getting into Blobby Boys 2. And so I guess you and I may have different responses to Blobby Boys 2. And I don't want to go into too much detail of this earlier release, but Blobby Boys 1 is made up of previously published material, and the stories, for the most part, are very short snippets. And so it does have this kind of almost mini comic feel where you have a lot of smaller installments, and I think they work well together, but you do have a series or a collection of individual stories, so it's a little more fragmented than the second Blobby Boys, because I think we have longer stories in this book. And I don't want to suggest that one was more enjoyable than the other. I think that the way that these two books are set up, they're quite different. I mean, they deal with the similar characters, but they're different kinds of reads. So what was your impression of Blobby Boys 2?
Well, let me ask, first of all, did Fashion Cat show up in Blobby Boys 1?
No.
Okay, so Fashion Cat is a new character for Blobby Boys 2.
Yes, that's what I gather. And he may have appeared elsewhere, but I didn't read him anywhere in Blobby Boys 1.
Okay. And is there an origin of the Blobby Boys in the first issue or first volume?
No, they're just there.
Okay, because in this story, in the first story in this collection, the guy, the fan who wants to become their drummer, asks, "What's your origin story?" And one of them just says, "Oh, we're aliens." That's it. So Christoph says that.
Yeah, and yeah,
that's so.
And we should mention that there are three Blobby Boys. There's Christoph that you mentioned, who has a head the shape of a heart. And then there's Adrian. I guess you can distinguish Adrian by his buck teeth, and then Max.
Yeah, Adrian only has one eye also.
And only one eye, yeah. Buck teeth and one eye. So those are the three Blobby Boys. And all three Blobby Boys are in the first Blobby Boys book, along with some other characters in Blobby Boy 1. For instance, there is Cyber Surfer,
right,
who is also in Blobby Boys 1. But you don't have Fashion Cat, which is it's a character completely outside of the Blobby Boys universe, if we want to call it that, or at least it seems to be. He could be in the same universe, but there's, unless I'm mistaken, I don't see any crossover between Fashion Cat and the Blobby Boys.
Well, he does. I guess that that last story where. The last 4 pages or so where Fashion Cat appeared don't seem to be continuing from anything else in the issue. So yeah. So anyway, it is a fun book. It's got that kind of, I don't know, that kind of humor that involves a lot of over the top violence and swearing. The Blobby Boys don't seem to have a strong moral compass. And so that's if you like that sort of humor, you get a lot of that in this book.
Yeah, and in the first story, there are a couple things going on. One, there is a police detective who is looking for the Blobby Boys. And then along with that, you have this other guy who is a big fan of the Blobby Boys, and he wants to join up as their keyboard player.
Right. Is there a keyboard player? I thought it was their drummer.
Well, it says toward the beginning, when this guy finds out about them looking for a new member of the band.
Oh yeah, that's right.
They're looking for a new keyboard member. The news
I don't know why. I don't know why I thought drummer. Oh well, I guess because his hands get cut off. I guess it's just as bad to play keyboard with no hands as it is to play drums. So
yeah,
it's fun.
Yeah, so that's part of the violence that you mentioned, and the detective also becomes the recipient of really graphic violence, although we see him attacked, I guess, off panel, so to speak. We just see the aftermath.
And he dishes it out, too.
Right. Yeah, so if people are disturbed by violence, then this may not be the book for you. But it's violence and even language that is contextualized within humor. So, I mean, this is all in good fun. And so, this is that kind of freewheeling, anything goes kind of independent comic, or, I don't know, smaller mini comic or zine comic that you would find. And I think that's where the most, if not all, the content originally came from that makes up Blobby Boys 1. It had been a variety of different zines and other kind of publications, maybe some online as well. But I'm wondering if these stories were created specifically for the second book. And I get the impression that they were, because I do not see in the publication information that these were previously published elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. The Blobby Boys themselves are fun, and the antics they get up to. But I really enjoyed Fashion Cat, who is one of the top fashion models, who's also a cat. And so Fashion Cat is insanely rich and basically gets to do whatever he wants in the world. That includes killing a baby, because he's annoyed with the baby that the baby is at a restaurant that he's at, and people ask to share the table so that they have room for their high chair, and that's it for that baby. And so anyway,
and then it's worth mentioning that after the baby's killed, you see his headstone, and there's some flowers in front of it, and on the headstone it just says "baby." Right.
And that Fashion Cat doesn't like the fact that a pizzeria that he's at is charging for $2 for water, and so he buys the restaurant, burns it down, and then buys one of the workers' apartment buildings and burns that down too.
That's my favorite part, by the way.
Yeah, and so that's kind of how Fashion Cat rolls. But Fashion Cat also suffers from a kind of existential ennui, because basically of his state in the fashion industry, the heights that he's reached, and the knowledge that is only always going to be temporary, that he will sometime fade from popularity.
Yeah. And in fact, the way that Blobby Boys 2 is set up is we get 2 Fashion Cat stories, or at least 2 sections of Fashion Cat. There's one after that first Blobby Boys story, the aforementioned violence with him killing a baby and then burning the pizzeria, and then the worker's apartment house. And then there's a story in the back at the very end of this book where we get the ennui-laden Fashion Cat. And in fact, it's almost like a retrospective of his life.
Right.
The way that last story is set up, with people talking about what Fashion Cat meant to them and who he was.
Right.
So, the Fashion Cat is funny, but that's one of the things that strikes me as so different. Blobby Boys 2 is so different from the first Blobby Boys book, is you see nothing of Fashion Cat in the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that if there's going to be a Blobby Boys 3, that we may get Blobby Boy stories plus others.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we will get more Fashion Cat stories, but there could always be flashbacks, I guess. But yeah, I'm curious to see more Blobby Boys, definitely.
Yeah. Now, were you familiar with the work of Alex Schubert before Blobby Boys?
No. Were you?
No. Like I said, I first saw his work when the first Blobby Boys came out about a year and a half ago, but maybe 2 years ago now. But before that, no. And I don't know of anything else that he's done. How would you describe his art style?
That's one of the things I was trying to get my figure out the language for. It's geometrical. That's one way I noticed it. It's definitely on the more abstract end of or iconic end of the spectrum, but everything seems to be very, very, kind of square and lined up. Everybody's fingers, for example, are exactly the same length, and heads are pretty much round. I'm not sure. How would you describe it?
It's a kind of minimalist art, and you're right. There are it's minimalist in terms of the shapes because you have fairly consistent roundedness and even angularity, but you also have a consistency in terms of panel layout. The vast majority of the pages are an 8-panel grid where you have 2 horizontal and 2 vertical and 8 horizontal per page. And also in terms of color, there is a bare minimum of color. The Blobby Boys are green, kind of a lightish green. Fashion Cat is a lightish blue, but then other colors are going to be yellow, kind of a light red, and that's primarily it.
Yep.
And I was flipping through this, and there was a part that I'd forgotten. In fact, the most elaborate part of this book is, and we don't have page numbers here, but this is at toward the end of the storyline where the Blobby Boys break up and they go their own ways. And one of them, the one with the one eye, is that Adrian? Yes, Adrian. He is in an alleyway, and he encounters, I guess in some kind of mind-addled state, because he's high at this point, he sees Doug from the PBS. I can't remember the name of that cartoon series that's on PBS.
Oh, yeah. That's who that is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's something that I used to watch every now and again when the kids were small, but I haven't in years. So, and it's a Doug that does not speak the same language that we do.
Yep.
So that's really mind-blowing.
Or that anybody does.
Yeah. Except in comics.
Yeah.
So, another thing to note about Schubert's work is, and you see this in a couple of places in Book 2, but I think it's the same thing in Blobby Boys 1. Every now and again, you'll see that he draws in a way that suggests that this is an almost an older comic, because there'll be a sticker on it that one of these like a store like Best Buy, or not Best Buy, Big Lots or Dollar General or whatever would put on it, kind of a clearance. It's just a simple, like a yellow and red clearance sticker, and it'll have a price on it. So it's almost as if we're reading something that is a remainder or a leftover, something they're trying to get rid of. And I think that's another little twist of humor there that Schubert has going on.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So this may be something that we'll see in the future with Schubert coming out of Koyama, and that is the ongoing Blobby Boys series. I hope so, because it's fun. I honestly don't know if that is something that I would have gravitated to if we weren't doing the Koyama Publisher Spotlight. I mean, I had an interest in it, but maybe the best way of putting it is that I was lazy about seeking it out. And then once we decided to do this Koyama Spotlight, I thought, okay, well, this is the opportunity to finally read Blobby Boys.
Yeah, I'm going to keep getting it if more volumes come out because I liked it.
Right.
I chuckled out loud.
Yeah, it's funny. The humor is
COL.
Maybe it's worth mentioning now something about the context of Koyama Press, and that would have been a good way of actually starting this show.
I was just thinking of that.
Blobby Boys. And this is a publisher started by Anne Koyama, who before she started the press, what was it, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, had no background in publishing and had no background in comics.
Huh.
In fact, I was reading an interview with her from several years ago that was on Comic Book Resources, and apparently she had I guess she worked for the equivalent of PBS in Canada, working with film, and she had some savings, but then took ill. She had an aneurysm and was laid up in the hospital for a long time. And while she was laid up, she says that she played the stock market. And I'm serious, according to this interview, and apparently made enough money to where when she got better and she wanted to do something different with her life, she was starting to get into comics, and she thought, okay, I'll start a press and publish those kind of offbeat comics that she appreciated. And I think there is the origins of Koyama Press.
That's great. And, as their website points out, koyamapress.com, that this was about 2007 that she founded this, and they're located out of Toronto. Mm-hmm. And in addition to doing comics and graphic novels, they also publish art books and zines.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, that may be a good segue into the next title that we're going to be discussing.
That was my point.
There you go, sir. This is Confetti, a book by Ginette Lapalme.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't call this a comic, more of an art book.
Right. The first maybe 10 or 15 pages involve some sequential art. Very avant-garde anyway. And then following that is really a series of photographs photographs and further illustrations of more of Lapalme's works.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right in that the only part of this book that would qualify as a comic, I think by most people's definition, would be the first several pages.
Mm-hmm. Which involves the story of a woman trying on some pants that have eyeballs in the butt.
Right. But even when she takes the pants off, there are eyeballs on her butt.
Right. And then that appears to be a motif in Lapalme's art throughout this book. That returns over and over again. The idea of eyeballs in the butt, of talking butts, of butts that spit stuff out, I guess.
And that's what happens in that original story, right? The woman with the pants with the eyes on it and her butt that also has eyes. She goes to the bathroom. This is gross. And she can't. It's like she's constipated. And then she looks down and realizes that it looks like some kind of animal mouth coming out of her butt. And so if she opens that mouth, then she can poop.
Mm-hmm.
Oy.
And she poops blue.
So I guess that makes it palatable.
Yeah. Yep. And then the next there's like a 2-panel story about someone pooping birds.
Right.
And there's more kind of scatological stuff, more images of pooping.
And in fact, you mentioned that is an iconic motif that runs throughout. I was going to add, the eyes on butts and pooping. What other links do you see running throughout Confetti, the various photographs of actual art objects that Lapalme creates, and also the sketches? I mean, one obvious one is cats.
Yeah, certainly cats. Also, the color palette she uses tends to be the same, very bright, often pastel colors. There's, I think, and this may be tied into all that other stuff too, but there's a sense at first when you look at some of the stuff that you're dealing with, kind of childhood objects that are kind of twisted and altered in really interesting ways. Like, for example, there's no page numbers, but she has in here this. I don't even remember the name of this game, and I don't remember if you ever did this, where you fold up a piece of paper, you write numbers and so on.
Oh, yes.
And messages in the papers and fold it up and did that as a kid. And so she has her own version of that I guess you could either cut out of the book or photocopy and play. And there's a photograph of it as well. But some of the messages you can land on are, you already know the answer to that in your heart. You will attract what you need. If you pray about it, it will come true. It is better that you don't know the answer. Is there something you must sacrifice for a good outcome? And hell no. The opposite outcome you desire will come to pass. These are ominous. Mm-hmm. Some are very positive and some are ominous, but that looks like fun.
Yeah. These are the kind of things that I guess we used to do as kids, but with a darker turn at places.
Yeah, and so some of the 3-dimensional works that she does are
the ones in the photographs.
Are in that. In that kind of childish vein, buttons and rings and ice cream cones with faces, things that look like cookies, and like you said, cats, lots of cats,
some dogs, and of course the aforementioned butts with eyes. And sometimes if they're not overtly rear ends, then you have, I'm looking at one of these 3-dimensional objects, a creature whose head looks like it could just as well be a tush.
Yep.
I think another image that keeps cropping up again and again is melting. Sometimes it is something like goo on someone's face, like a cat or a dog's face. Other times it's almost like skin or something on the skin is melting off. And in places it looks like, parts of the body, whether it be animal or human, are just melting off to the point that you can't distinguish what this creature is. And I think along with that, the whole melting, there's a lot of liquid. There's the expulsion of some sort. There's poop, there's pee, there's melting skin, if we want to call it that. Looks like something almost like intestines. There's a lot of leakage.
Yes.
Yeah. It's really different. Now, what did you expect when you picked up this book?
Oh, I didn't go into it with many expectations at all, because I think, well, first of all, I kind of flipped through it immediately upon getting it to see what I was looking at, and realized early that it's an art book rather than being a narrative. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of spent some time with it.
Yeah, exactly. And because I'm like you, when I first got it, I flipped through it real quick, and then I thought, okay, this will take me no time at all to read. And so I thought that, in the midst of preparing for today's show, I would just zip through this because, it's not like I have to comprehend a storyline or anything. But I tell you, I spent a lot more time looking at this book and, quote-unquote, reading through it, reading the visuals than I had anticipated, because I thought that it would be something that I would just give a cursory glance at, which is being unfair to Lapalme's work, of course. But again, that's what I had going in. But then once I started to look at these images and become engaged in sometimes the fine detail that goes into I think most of these art objects, whether they are photographs of 3D things that she's created or the various illustrations. There's a lot going on here. Again, no story, but a lot of visual thickness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like since I'm not really knowledgeable on contemporary fine arts all that much, I don't know if I have the vocabulary even to discuss these works, if that makes sense. But I do find them really visually striking. Mm-hmm. And I do love the sense of color.
I agree. So this is definitely a fun book, and I tell you, I know that she's an artist. I have no idea where her gallery is, if she has a gallery, or where you could find her objects. But I'd love to go through some kind of shop, some type of gallery, and see all of this stuff in person.
Yeah, I think that she currently has a gallery showing going on right now, if you're in Toronto, at Weird Things Gallery, going on from April 16th to May 13th.
So hey, a reason for us to head up to Toronto.
Well, yeah, you could go to TCAF, which is coming up.
That's right.
And then...
that second weekend of May.
Yeah.
And by the way, it is worth mentioning that many of these books that we're discussing today, the ones that are coming out in May, will be showcased at TCAF in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And that's what the publicist Ed Cancatervater had mentioned to me. So, and by the way, a big shout out to Ed for not only sending us the books that we're discussing today, these spring releases, but also he has provided us with review copies, digital review copies of Koyama books in the past. So, thank you very much, Ed, for doing that. It's efforts like this that helps us to do what we do on the Comics Alternative.
Yep, exactly.
Anything else on Confetti?
Nope.
Okay, let's go to Mighty Star and the Castle of the Cancatervater. And I always trip up on that name. So Mighty Star and the Castle of the Cancatervater.
Yep.
And this is by A. Degen. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name.
Alex Degen, I think.
Degen. Okay, it's his name is Alex, but he goes by A. In the book, although in the author page they do mention him as Alex. So it's Degen?
That's how I'm going to say it.
Okay, that makes sense to me. And was this someone that you were familiar with before Mighty Star?
No.
Yeah, same here. And that's the case with most of the creators that I read coming out of Koyama, with a few exceptions. Last year, Andy Wolverton and I reviewed Borjang Baby from Renee French, and that was a Koyama book, but I knew about French's work before that. Michael DeForge is another creator that I'm much more familiar with now than I was, let's say, a year or two ago. Jesse Jacobs, somewhat, but I think most of the people that I see published through Koyama are brand new to me, and I think that's one of the great things about Koyama is that they are publishing young, sometimes first-time artists. These are their first books coming out. And I don't know if this is the first book from Alex Degen, but this is the first one that I'm familiar with.
Right. Yeah, Michael DeForge is the one of their creators I was most familiar with, but they're also... I was happy to see that they're also putting out, and this is coming out at the end of 2015, a new edition of Julia Wertz's Drinking at the Movies. So I'm happy to see that as well. And it seems like as we'll get to in a minute, autobiographical comics are one of their mainstays.
So how would you describe Mighty Star and the Castle of the Cancatervater?
Well, I think we should be disqualified from talking about it because it's a superhero comic.
Well,
it should not be appearing on our show.
No, it's mainstream superheroes.
I'm just kidding. It is a superhero. It is a bizarre, surreal, silent superhero story. In fact, there are only a few letters that appear throughout the book: H, N, and K, and the number 3. I mean, even in printed text, those are the primary letters that appear. Other than when we get the dramatis personae at the beginning of each chapter, and I guess there's one ransom note that comes in. That's got some actual text on it, and then a couple other random places, but otherwise lots of N's and K's and H's.
Exactly. And I think that the way you described it is accurate, that this is, I would call it not a wordless comic, but a silent comic, because of the action that's taking place. The only sounds, so to speak, that we hear are those N's and M sounds. It's almost like a humming.
But a telephone makes that noise. Somebody getting hurt makes that noise. It's like it's an all-purpose N.
Right, exactly. And then sometimes you have when Zoe, one of the characters, Zoe Trala, is singing, you have musical notes. Now, no lyrics, but we have the musical notes. But it's not wordless because, you mentioned the dramatis personae at the beginning of each of the main sections. And we do get a list of who's who. So, for instance, after the prologue, and then we get, of course, the title, which is words, then we get a list of some of the characters in this first main chapter. So that is the false philosopher, the bad apple, and then a couple of artists who are kidnapped. There's the aforementioned Zoe, who's a singer, and then Art Anglewhite, who is an artist. And then there are other characters as well, and of course the titular hero, Mighty Star. And each of these chapters begins that way, where we get a list of the characters in this particular section. And, some of them, the main ones, are carried over from chapter to chapter, and some we only see briefly here or there.
Right. So the plot basically seems to be that that Bad Apple has kidnapped Zoe Trala and Art Anglewhite for some nefarious purpose that involves putting Zoe Trala in a spanking machine and beating Art Anglewhite in the head in another machine to get something out of them to fuel his project.
Right.
And then Mighty Star has to fight Bad Apple, and with I guess the help of some scientists, which includes Dr. Cienfuego.
Oh, that's my favorite.
The smoking dog, the dog with a pipe in its mouth.
That's right. Yeah, and the way to describe the action is an approximation. Because this is a silent comic, we don't know exactly what's going on here. But from what I can gather, the reason why the Bad Apple, I guess along with the false philosopher in some form, kidnap Zoe and Art, these are creators, and they chain them up, and they use their creation in order to fuel whatever it is that they're doing. And they're in a floating mansion, and the mansion makes this kind of humming end sound, and it's wreaking havoc at various places in the book. Now, how do they translate Zoe and Art's art into power or fuel? We don't know, but again.
So it looks like, okay, so the Cancatervater, as the title, as part of the title, is a kind of giant grotesque machine that is a part of the Bad Apple and the false philosophers.
Or it looks like a combination of broken statue and machine.
Yeah, and and Zoe and Art's creative powers, I guess, that are drained out of them, are used to create the Stain Men, which are the liquid lackeys of the villains, and so on. And so I don't know how much use it even is to try to summarize the plot, though I think it's kind of fun to go through this book and try to figure out what the plot is and how it's developing. But I found it to be more of an experience, if we're talking about kind of experiential comics, than a straight up narrative. Though there is a narrative that's going on here, and in fact, much of what you would boil this down to does end up sounding like a fairly conventional superhero narrative until you actually take a look at it.
Oh, exactly. And you're right about this being probably more experiential than, at least on the surface, narrative driven. And I feel that way about many Koyama publications.
Yes.
That you can tease out a story from this, from the various publications. And I think the work of Michael DeForge is a great example of this. But if you only read DeForge's work, the same thing, reading Degen's Mighty Star, if you read it only for the story, then that's only a fraction of what you should be getting out of that book.
Yeah.
It's the way that the art is used, and the art is probably built upon the story, or the story is built upon the art. There's some stories that, let's say more mainstream comics, the story can be told in a variety of different artistic styles, right? Depending on who the artist is. You have a story, and you won't find, I would guess, much variation in the way that the story is told, regardless of the art that is used, who the artist is. But I think with creators like Degen, DeForge, and Jesse Jacobs, it's the way that they draw becomes part and parcel of the story.
Yes.
And it gets back to the experience that you mentioned.
Yeah, and it is a great looking book, and it's one that I kind of keep, since we got these books, I kind of keep opening this book up and looking through it. Once I made my once through to get the gist of what's going on, I kind of re-immersed myself in it every once in a while, just in random places. I have to say that one of my favorite parts is where we get to see Bad Apple's power really at work, which is that he is basically a head that's an apple that can switch bodies, and he has a variety of bodies that are naked human bodies with with like a kind of stem and leaf attached to the where the head should be, and then his head can fly around and move from body to body.
It's easy for me to understand what you're saying as you're describing this.
Yeah.
But I can imagine our listeners
Right.
who are not familiar with this book thinking, "What the hell are they talking about?"
Right. Well, and just to also confuse them even further, Bad Apple actually is having sex at one point with one of his male. He has a male body and a female body, and his apple head switches back and forth between the male and female body.
Exactly.
So, there you go.
Yeah, and in fact, I was going to mention what you're referring to right now. This is in part 6, where we get the community of bodies, and Bad Apple's not even in the Dramatis Personae is not even called Bad Apple. He's called Applehead.
Yeah.
And he is the ruler of a place apparently called New Utopia. And there's something about this that is very much like a creation myth. And Bad Apple doesn't seem as evil here. It's like he's creating a new world, but of course it's a new world at the expense of others. So yeah, I found that fascinating. Of course, it's no accident that he is an applehead, and there's something almost biblical going on here in the creation of this new utopia.
Yes, but it is a utopia that seems to be created at the expense of others, and so that's where Mighty Star comes in, and really, Mighty Star seems to be on his own a pretty conventional superhero. He has his girlfriend, Honey Hush, and he answers distress calls, like just about any other superhero does.
And one of the things that fascinated me about this book is not so much the more discernible villains such as Bad Apple and Cancatervater, but much more so False Philosopher and Messerin. And in fact, the Messerin character we see at the very beginning in the prologue, and he pops up occasionally, and we see him more prominently at the end. But I'm not sure exactly what function he plays outside of... It's almost like he's a henchman, although a more important or prominent henchman. But we never see him overtly doing anything evil.
Right.
So I'm curious about that. But also, the False Philosopher, I think. Well, first he looks freaky. It's almost as if he is an empty mask of a head, and there's someone inside, because where the mouth is, I guess, you see some eyes staring out of it. If that might be the best way of describing this visually. But it's almost as if the way that Degen has written this, and the way, I guess more importantly, the way that he ends this book, we could get another Mighty Star, or at least another story centered around the False Philosopher.
Sure. Yeah, this may not be the last Mighty Star story.
Right. Because there's an epilogue to this book, but even before the epilogue, we get both Messerin and the False Philosopher. I mean, they seem to have made it out alive. And unscathed. In fact, we see the False Philosopher playing a video game of some sort.
Right.
So it looks like he could be back possibly for another. And then in the epilogue, he's doing something with a dried out body that Messerin brings him. And again, in the abstract, this just sounds weird. But as you said earlier, Andy, this is one of those narratives that you really have to experience in order to wrap your brain around.
Right.
So I like this.
Yes.
Very good book. Anything else on Mighty Star before we move on to the final Koyama book for the spring season?
No.
Okay. This one is by Dustin Harbin, and it is Diary Comics. As Harbin tells us at the very beginning of this book, this is the result of an experiment that he began at the first part of 2012, and it started
2010.
2010.
Yeah.
And so at least for that first year, he tried, not every day, but probably most days throughout the year, to create some kind of comic for the day. Now, sometimes the daily entry is what we see in the book as an entire page, and sometimes it's just one panel.
Right.
But for that first year especially, there seems to be something for most of the days of the year. And this originally appeared as 4 individual issues from Koyama.
Mm-hmm.
But now all 4 of those are collected into this one thicker volume that's coming out next month. Now you've met Harbin before, right? At Heroes Con?
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to that in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit more about this book first. So, you mentioned it being an experiment, and after a kind of long introduction, we get into the first January 1st, 2010 cartoons, and I think one of the keys to this book is that it is an experiment in what you really get to see, and I think this is a bold move for Harbin to do. You really get to see the maturation of him as an artist. Just by the time you get to the end of the book, and if you look back to those earliest ones, it's pretty shocking how much he developed, how much of his style he developed over the course of just 2 years.
Oh, exactly. Now, you mentioned this long-ish introduction before we get to the first entries from January 2010. And I think it's worth focusing on this a bit because, for me, the way that Harbin frames his diary entries makes all the difference in the world. Now, he says in the introduction, imagine a train headed east or west. The train has many cars. Some are old and dented and rusty. The ones toward the back look newer, but they all have that train dirt. Most of the cars are empty. There are long stretches of empty cars, then some full ones, or maybe just 1 or 2. It's hard to tell where the train is going. You can see there are mountains, or maybe trees, maybe neither. And then he gives us a little background about when he started this in January of 2010. And the reason I wanted to read this is because he uses this metaphor of trains, which I think is highly effective throughout this book. And it is both a thematic and also a visual way of providing linkage and continuity among its various components.
Right. And I think that the way that the train is described is how running it along the top of it at the same speed in the opposite direction, or moving at all, that kind of what you see as you go by and how you're kind of aware of your life passing by is an interesting concept, because when we talk about this as diary comics, one of the things I noticed in it, especially early on, that this seems to be a diary, in the earliest entries anyway, a diary in the truest sense, in that he's recording things that happen in his day without really a lot of explanation. So if you don't know who people are, he's not writing in a sense for an audience that's going to explain, or where he's going to explain who it is he's talking to, or who these people are, or how they really are a part of his life. You just kind of have to go through it and figure that out as you go along, or not. For example, he worked at the time that this started, he was working at Heroes Aren't Hard to Find in Charlotte, and so he talks about the people that work there, but if you don't know the people that work at Heroes Aren't Hard to Find, you're not going to know who he's talking about.
Exactly, because there are a couple of times early on, as you mentioned, that he'll refer to a Shelton. He says, I need to contact Shelton. And if you he doesn't even mention that he had worked at Heroes Aren't Hard to Find. Later on, it becomes apparent, but early on, when he's referencing Shelton, you're going, okay, who's Shelton?
Right.
But if you know that he's from Charlotte, and like me, a native Charlottean, which is one of the things that pulls me to this book, then you kind of put the pieces together. But he doesn't provide that kind of context, which is fine. I mean, you're right, and that makes it more of a personal diary.
Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the other things that progresses through this book is not just Harbin's style as a cartoonist, but also his sense of his audience, because these were originally published on his website and later published as single issues in his Diary Comic series, and so as he was gaining, I get the sense from reading this, as he was gaining more readers for his webcomics, he was getting a greater sense of who his audience was and how to create for an audience that a work that's no longer a kind of literal personal diary and more of a record of his daily life to be shared with others.
Oh, exactly. And then along with that is also a progression of himself, both as a creator and working within a larger community of comics creators, which I think becomes much more prominent in the last half of the book. And also just himself as a person, right? Because he doesn't dwell on it much, but every now and again he'll mention his issues with depression. Obviously, his relationship with his girlfriend. What is her name? Kate.
Kate. Yeah.
Kate. Yeah. So we do get, as the book progresses, more of a sense of kind of an inner directness of understanding who he is, and I don't mean that in a sense of navel gazing.
Though he does talk about navel gazing.
He does, and I think that because he is aware of that pitfall, I think that is one of this book's and one of his diary's saving graces, because he's aware that this is, a danger that many autobiographical comic artists may fall into. They may fall prey to mere navel gazing in writing for themselves and about themselves, and that's it. But I think from the very beginning, getting back to this introduction, he lets us know that this is a project of his that was ongoing. It was an experiment, and along the way, he learned a lot about not only his art but also himself, and as you put it, his relationship with his audience. And much of that audience is other comics creators. And of course, at the very end, we see him in Toronto with Seth and Chester Brown.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the more interesting to me sections of the book were his diary comics about going to different shows, and just what the mechanics and economics of comic shows are for someone who's either self-publishing or doing these small press books like this. And his interactions with other creators, whether he knows them and is friends with them, or whether he's just meeting them, like in the case with Seth and Chester Brown.
Right. Yeah, in that sense, his visit to the various cons and how he writes about it reminds me some of the things that Gabrielle Bell has written about as well, and her experiences at various conventions.
Yeah, and in fact, Gabrielle Bell and James Kachalka came up a lot in my mind when I was reading this, because both of them also have those kind of existential diary comics moments where they wonder, or somebody else in their lives wonders, are you doing this for the comic? Like, are you creating an event in your life so that you'll have something interesting to write about and draw? And that seems to be a kind of inevitable process of doing a diary comic, that you eventually get into this kind of metacritical mode where you wonder if the diary comic is recording your life, or if you're creating a life for the diary comic.
Yeah, in his introduction, he even says as much, that at one point he did feel, in doing the diary comic experiment, that it was becoming something kind of contrived. He mentions, I think, calling it a crutch at times, but then it becomes something more.
Well, yeah, but later on he has a fight with his girlfriend Kate, and uses as kind of his defense about articulating his feelings for her. Don't you see how I depict you in the comic? And she comes back with something like, that's great for that person in the comic, but that's not me.
That's right. That's a representation of her. And
I think so. You mentioned the phrase saving grace. I think that what makes Harbin's diary comics endearing is the self-critical side of them, where he becomes aware of his his art influencing his life, but he's also very much aware of the way he interacts with others, and his kind of social issues that he analyzes on many occasions throughout the book.
Mm-hmm. And for me, this tone really begins when he does break up initially with his girlfriend Kate. This is in the story from the 24th of March 2012, titled Untethered. And it's worth mentioning that at first he doesn't do this, but once he gets into the first month or two of his diary comic, he begins titling each entry. And so this one, titled Untethered, is about him and Kate carrying boxes. They're breaking up, and in fact, boxes becomes a prominent both title and theme as we get into the strips that follow, because he has a series of strips that are titled Boxes. Boxes Part 1, Boxes Point 2, so on.
Do you know which number Untethered is? Because there's numbers in the bottom corner of each.
366.
Okay, so that's pretty far along.
Right. Yeah. But I don't want to, because when I pointed this out, I said that this is where this kind of more self-aware, more philosophical tone comes out. I don't want to suggest that it wasn't there before. I think it was. It's just that, to me, the diary comics really mature beginning at this point. I mean, this part of Harbin was there earlier, but I think that once we get to this breakup, he becomes much more aware, it seems to me, of the way that he interacts with others, his relationship with others, and his problems in interacting with others. I think in these final stories, especially when he is having dinner with Seth and Chester Brown, he tells us that he has a problem interacting with people, coming up with topics of conversation, of not sounding stupid, and he's very self-aware of that, to the point that it almost silences him.
Yeah, and this gets into, when I had some trepidation going into this book, because I have met Dustin Harbin a couple times at HeroesCon. I'm sure he has no idea who I am and wouldn't remember me. I don't think they were very memorable interactions, for him, just kind of introductions and talking. But in one of the last ones, I was talking to a friend of mine at the art auction that they have, and Dustin has actually hosted that art auction in the past when he was working at Heroes Aren't Hard to Find. But anyway, he wasn't in that capacity here. And so, the friend of mine introduced me to him, and he said hi, and then he kind of turned his back to me. And even though I was talking to the friend, kind of positioned himself between me and the person with his back to me, so I could no longer continue the conversation.
Huh.
And I was standing there, and another person, another friend of mine was with me, and I looked like, what a jerk. But now I see, after reading this book, that, that he's, I don't know, maybe who knows that this is an excuse or whatever, but that and he may not even have been aware of what he was doing. I'm sure he wasn't. I'm hypersensitive to that kind of move when somebody does that in a social situation, but I got a lot of respect for him after reading this book for his honesty about his social interactions. So I don't know if he ends up listening to this. I don't want to come across as a dick, but that was my experience, and so I have a different kind of perspective on that experience now.
Well, if we see him at Heroes Con in a couple of months when we're there, he may say, "Hey, I heard your podcast, and you're a dick."
Yeah, well, he's more than entitled to say that. In fact, anybody that's listening comes to Heroes Con, you can stop me and say, "Hey, you're a dick."
Yeah,
I deserve it.
Yeah, and to me, what's most important is the fact that they listen to the podcast, right? So whether they praise us or call us assholes or dicks, at least they're listening.
Yeah, that I guess.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but this is not the first time we have discussed Dustin Harbin's work on the podcast.
Okay.
Because when Wolverton and I did the No Brow Publisher Spotlight last November, I think it was, we briefly discussed his work, which is another one of these the fold-outs, concertinas, Behold the Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
So far, the only two times we've discussed Harbin's work have been on Publisher Spotlights. That's kind of curious. Any final thoughts on Diary Comics?
No, I don't know. I hope I didn't. I apologize if I came across as a dick.
No, I don't think you did.
Okay. I didn't name any names outside of him, so.
No, you were being autobiographical in ways that he is in Diary Comics.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. And in fact, I like all of the books that we discussed today. Diary Comics, Mighty Star, and The Castle of the Cancatervater, Confetti, and then Blobby Boys 2. But I think the one that's going to stick with me the most in terms of its emotional impact is probably Diary Comics.
Well, yeah, and because lately I've been interested in autobiographical comics anyway. I've been immersing myself in a bunch of other diary comics as well, both in print and on the web, and so it's interesting to see. One of the questions I had as I first started reading these comics, the Harbin's Diary Comics, was what's the point of this? What is the purpose? What is so interesting about his life that he feels compelled to share it? With Kachalka, for example, you get a lot of the kind of what's it like to be a father, that kind of stuff, right? In the American Elf comics, and here I was trying to see what the purpose was or what the interest would be, but I think it's for me a lot of it was almost a kind of like Künstlerroman, though not a novel. That it's the development of an artist that we're seeing here, and it's a very short period of time, and the leap of quality in his cartooning for over the course of those 2 years, and then even to today is remarkable. So that as I realized that evolution was occurring, that's what really held my interest in it.
Yeah. And it's also worth noting, we haven't even mentioned this, that he was a letterer on Matt Fraction's Casanova.
Yeah, which comes up a lot in the book.
Yeah. So if you think you may not be familiar with Dustin Harbin's work, if you have read Casanova, then you are familiar with Harbin's work.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, that was great. I do enjoy these publisher spotlights. Many times they're a lot of work and almost prohibitive in terms of the number of books that we look at. But I think this time around, it was quite containable. 4 books coming out in the spring, and each of them was very different in its own way.
Yeah.
Yep. And if you want to find out what all the hoopla is about Koyama books, not only can you go to their website and find out more information about their spring releases, but you can visit the websites of our sponsors, and that is Discount Comic Book Service and their sister company, In Stock Trade. So if you didn't pre-order any of the Koyama books, then you may be able to find some on InStockTrades.com. Whether you order your comics through In Stock Trades or DCB Service, you can't go wrong. Great places to get your books. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know the kind of things you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, you can click on the Send Voicemail tab on the right hand of your browser, and from the comfort of your own computer or mobile device and through the wonders of SpeakPipe, leave us a message that way. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way, on the phone. Our number's 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right. Or you can get a hold of us by email. We are 2guys@comicsalternative.com. Or you can get a hold of us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
And we have our Twitter feed where you can find out updates to our podcast as well as new content to our blog. Follow our Twitter feed at the number 2 guys with PhDs.
That's right. You can also find us on Facebook, on Tumblr, and on Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as our growing list of reviews and comics-related commentary, at the website, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. All the ways to get a hold of us and let us know how we're doing. And
yeah.
Tell me I'm a dick.
That's right. Yeah. Or you can praise us. That would be fine as well.
That's true.
Just as Rob did when he left us a message on Facebook. So there's so many ways of getting in touch with us. In addition to the aforementioned, there's the forum. Join in on the forum. You can also leave us feedback on iTunes and Stitcher. We do appreciate that as well. So leaving us 5-star reviews and some kind of commentary helps our positioning in those sources. So let us hear from you.
Yep.
Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.